All right, well, it's good to be back with everybody again this week, trying to bring you another lesson. This is lesson 6, Pray Like Jesus for the Father's Will. Um, I hope that we get something from these 7 lessons that we'll be wind up going through. This is number 6. That means there's one more left. So, just with saying that, I am going to get into pray, but I hope that you're taking your time to really listen to this and to spend some time in prayer with Christ, building that relationship with Him and everything. So if you bow heads, I'll get us in prayer and then I will get us started. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come here through this platform, this electronic platform, to create a video and then upload it to Instagram and YouTube for our youth to watch it and anyone else that is willing and wants to watch it, Lord. I just thank you for giving me the insight on how to go through this and to bring it about into light and everything, Lord. And I just ask you to be with each individual, that open their hearts, Lord, and they receive something from what you're trying to tell them. And I just thank you for all that you do for us in your glorious name. Amen. So, here's what I want to start with. The first thing I want to do is I want to start with a question. And the question is, how many of us in general, you, me, everybody on the planet really, deep down, or even just surface deep, want to really please our parents? Okay, that's the question you want to ask. And I say that because most of us do want to please our parents, okay? And the reason why we want to please our parents is, one, we understand that parents are older and they're wiser. And honestly, we understand that the choices that they are helping us make are the healthy choices, and that they're responsible for making those healthy choices for us. But beyond that, though, we don't want to honor our parents. Okay, and I say that because here's the thing: parents have authority in our lives. Okay, God gave them this authority. And it's our duty to show them respect. But the problem is that we don't always do that. And I'm going to point out a few things here in a second on why we don't. But let me point out first some things parents do for us. Most of our parents provide us with everything we need, and even things we want. Like cell phones. Cell phones are not a need, but they're a want. And a lot of parents provide a cell phone eventually for their kids. And that's just the honest truth. I got mine when I was like 17, and I was able to pay for my own bill. That's how I got a cell phone. Actually, I think it was 16. Video games. We know parents sometimes buy us video games, or they'll buy the console, Christmas present, things like that. Or they'll provide the internet to play the games. And things like that. So they provide all these things for us. They also provide things that we really do need, which is food. But let's go ahead and be honest with ourselves. How many of us are like, Mom, is there any way he'll give me $5 or $10 so I can stop at McDonald's, I don't know, or Ski Daddy's, Arby's, Wendy's, Sonic, something like that, so I can give me a drink, something to snack on after school, or, just wander around during the summer and things like that. They also provide us with a house. They get us clothes. Most parents aren't going to let us go without clothes. And they're going to provide all of those things for us. And honestly, I can literally keep going and going and going and just coming up with things that I know parents provided. Things that my parents provided for me, like a truck to drive, even though I didn't deserve it. And we'll get into why that's important here in a minute, the truck part. But here's the things. Most of the time, and in most cases, our parents are always here for us. They're here to pick us up. They're here to guide us. They're here to take care of us. They may not be perfect. Well, that's kind of a joke. Nobody is perfect, okay? But our parents deeply love us, okay? They deeply love us. It's like I feel like it's in genetics. Like for me, being a dad to my daughters, I have a deep love, and it's just rooted inside of me. So just put it from that perspective. But because of all these things, we do our best to obey them. Okay? We try to obey them. We try to listen to what they tell us to do and everything. But here's the problem. And I'm going to give you an example of this. before we see the problem in its whole. But the problem is this. Well, here's the example first, actually. Like I said, when I was 17, I started driving. I started my senior year of high school. My buddy and I, we're real close. We're like brothers. And then I started dating some girl and everything. Well, my curfew at the beginning of my senior year was 9 o'clock. I had to be at home at 9 o'clock. Well, I didn't like that. And I mainly didn't like it because I thought 9 o'clock was early, and I played football as well. So I didn't get out of practice till 6, 6:30, 7 o'clock. So to me, 2 hours, and I didn't have 2 hours, more like an hour and a half. And I had to eat dinner, and I had to drive home because we lived about 15 minutes away from town. So not as bad as some of our Lewisburg people, so from the church in general, but so I lived about 15 minutes. So I really had about an hour to do what I wanted or to spend the time with the girl I was dating. But so what I did was I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to come home at 9:05. And I come home at 9:05, nobody said anything. So I was like, well, I'm going to come home at 9:15. I come home at 9:15, nobody said anything, even though I was told to be home at 9. Then I was like, you know what, I'm going to try 9:30. I come home at 9:30, and here's what happened. I got into a load of trouble. My dad told me that if I came home late again, he was going to take my keys, and he would drive me everywhere. And all I had to do was obey. There was a reason why they wanted me home at 9. One was so that I would get enough rest for the next day of school. 2 was so that they would know I was home safe, because 9 to 10 is normally when they start to go to bed. So they wanted to be confident I was in our house around 9 o'clock before they went to bed. But, and I love my parents. I love my parents deeply, but I wanted to do everything they asked of me. I did. But the problem is, what they asked me to do, coming home at 9, did not fit in the plans that I thought was best for me. So what I did was, like I said, I tried to change my curfew myself and see if they would go along with it. And there for a little bit, they did go along with it until I pushed it too far. And then because of that, there had to be a punishment involved. And that's the problem with most of us in our lives, even today, is that we have a problem with authority. And that's just the honest truth. Okay? And I say that, like the speed limit. The speed limit is set for a reason. And then authorities say we should follow law, says follow the speed limit. But let's go ahead and be honest. If you're driving, how many of you go 5 miles over? I can raise my hand. Okay, I am always going at least 5 miles over, because in my head I'm like, oh, well, they're not going to pull me over for 5 miles over. If I go 9, they'll probably give me a citation, but I'm not going to get a ticket, so it's okay. So I'm always pushing those boundaries, and it's because naturally we have a problem with authority. A lot of people, because of sin in general, honestly, we have a fleshly body, we have a problem with authority. And so we may try our best to obey the rules, because honestly, I try to drive the speed limit, and the next thing I know, I'm going 60 and it's a 55, or I'm going 65 and it's a 55. Okay, or I'm in town and we know how town works. It's like a 25 or 30 mile an hour zone, and you're going 40, 45, because that's what you're used to going. We want to obey the rules, but we don't, okay? We push those limits, okay? And when I say this, what that means is we're not honoring the law's authority, and more specifically to me, I wasn't honoring my parents' authority whenever I was trying to break curfew, okay? And that's a problem. Because in the Bible, we are called to obey as a matter of the heart. Meaning that if we obey, it means that we really care and love the person that we are obeying. Okay, now I do care and love my parents, and I worked on that. I tried to do what they asked me, and then sometimes it required a consequence for me to get it in my head, hey, I need to be listening. I need to be obeying here, okay? And that's just part of it. And here's what we know. the cost of, as Jesus grew nearer and nearer to the cross, so as Jesus was getting closer to sacrificing his life on the cross for us, the cost that he had in living obediently was extremely difficult to bear. I mean, you think about this. You are walking to your death. How hard do you think it would be for you to walk to your death? I would run away. I'm just being honest. I really don't think I could do it. I would run away. I have 3 children, a wife. I have a church. I don't want to leave that. So I'm going to run the opposite direction and try to save myself. And that's just the truth. But Jesus never wavered. His Father was worthy of honor. His Father had related to him in all the ways the Father should. And as a sign of humility, Jesus chose obedience. He didn't choose to do what would work best for him, which honestly, let's be real, not dying sounds a whole lot better than dying. Okay? But Jesus chose to be obedient. And he didn't choose this because it would benefit him, like I just said. Dying doesn't benefit him. Okay? It just brings pain and everything. But he truly valued the will of the Father over his own desires. And that's what we're going to get to, honestly. Is we want to value the will of the Father, God, more than our own desires. I know we want to play video games sometimes. I know we want to go to the movies sometimes. I know we just are so tired we want to go to bed. But we want to be obedient above that and actually spend that time with God, getting into His Word, spending that time praying and building that relationship with Him. Because we want to be obedient just like Jesus was. So, still going with, driving. Let's just go ahead and point this out. Every high schooler takes a driver's test. Well, most of the time. I mean, obviously, there's special cases where you don't. But the big event in your life is going to be to take a driver's test. If you've already taken it, you can probably agree, yeah, taking that driver's test was a pretty big event. It was pretty amazing. But here's how I felt. Okay, I took mine my sophomore year. All right, and I went and practiced the day before, and I'll just go ahead and tell you, I forgot to put the truck in reverse, doing a turnabout 4 times out of 10. Okay, so that's a 60% chance of me getting it right. And so I was like, there's no way that I'm going to get this right. And then I was like, okay, maybe I can. But here's the thing. I struggled going to bed that night. I knew I was taking my test the next day. I had messed up some things practicing the day before. Because turnabouts, parallel parking, things like that aren't things we normally practice. But those are things that can fail us when we take our driver's test. Or when I took it, that was the case. So, yeah, I was nervous. Okay? And here's the thing. I didn't want to be the guy that failed his driver's test. Because, honestly, I felt like I would be made fun of. My birthday's in March, as a lot of you know. And so that means I was taking my test, like the actual driving part, right when school started. Okay? So, meaning... But March is 9th, so September I think is when I took it, okay? So, I'm in the beginning of school year here, and I did not want to be that guy. That I was like, oh, look, he's the one that failed. Okay, I wanted to be that one, because a lot of my friends that already had their license, I wanted to be able to drive too. I wanted to have that independence. And, honestly, this may be a little dramatic. Personally, they may not have cared at all. They might have been cool with it, been like, it's no big deal. One of us failed too. And sometimes, we just don't tell people we failed. But that's how I felt at the time. But I bring that up because the driver's test is still a test. And test anxiety, okay, which is a deep sense of worry or fear of failing, which is accompanied with tension and nausea, is a very real thing. It's not made up. It's very real. Okay, I don't normally have just flat out test anxiety. I did for that because as a kid. I have anxiety of being alone. I have a very bad time of being alone with anxiety. Okay, but it's still the same thing. It's very real, very real. And honestly, over a third of students experience test anxiety. You may be watching this and you're like, that's definitely me. Every time I sit to a test, I freak out. I start breathing really hard. I start sweating. I get clammy. That is test anxiety. A lot of us get it, and that's just the truth. But here's what I want to point out is that tests aren't meant to be easy. Yeah, we could say, oh, we can make the test easier and won't be anxious. That is true. But tests aren't made to be easy. What tests are made for is they are meant to push our limits. They're meant to determine the thresholds of what we know or of our abilities. They're also used to see how far we are committed. That is what tests are for. For example, if I want to test my strength, I could throw 500 pounds on a bench and I would lift it like it was toilet paper. Let's just be honest. It's that light. Yeah, right. Okay, that is a bold-faced lie right there. If I put 500 pounds on a bench, okay, and a bench is where you bring it down to your chest and you push it up. If I even get the 500 pounds off of the rack, okay, which is what's holding it up, it's going to break my chest. I'm not going to be able to hold that weight up. It's going to come crashing down. Boom, my chest is broken. That's the truth, okay? It would kill me, hands down. But if I were to put 100 pounds on there, well, guess what? I could just do that 100 times. It would be so easy. And that really wouldn't be a test. Because a test isn't about being way too hard and way too easy. It's about finding that one spot that pushes you to your limit. Doesn't make you fail, but it makes you push yourself beyond where you're currently at. That is what a test should do. Honestly, and that used to be 250 pounds for me when it comes to strength. Definitely not now. If I could get 185, I'd be excited. Okay? Just to point that out. But the disciples had been tested many times throughout their time with Jesus. He called them to leave everything and follow Him. And guess what they did? They followed Him. They dropped everything they were doing and they followed Him. He sent them out to the surrounding villages. And guess what they did? They went. Okay? He authorized them to heal and preach. And guess what? They did these things in confidence and with authority. But soon they would face the test that they would be ready for. They would face a test unlike anything they could have imagined. And then the hope is that they would be ready for it. So Luke 22, verse 39 and 40 reads, "And he came out and went," and we're talking about Jesus here, "as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, 'Pray that you may not enter into temptation.'" Okay, so as usual, we see here that Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives. So he goes away from the crowd. He pulls away from them to spend time in prayer. And in this instance, though, we see that Jesus is encouraging the disciples to pray for strength. He's telling them to pray to be ready for the test they would soon face. That is Jesus' instruction. Pray to overcome temptation. Well, guess what? Temptation is that test. Okay? And that's what he's telling them. Don't be tempted. Pray for strength in this moment. And then here's the thing. Jesus himself even prayed that they wouldn't come into temptation and that their faith would not fail. And we saw this a little in the last lesson that we looked at as well. Faith that endures. Okay? We talked about how Jesus prayed that Peter would overcome the test, the trial that he was going to face. And we know ultimately that Peter wasn't ready and he failed that test for sure. But here's the thing, is that this time though, when Jesus went is that he is actually going to pray for himself. And then here's the thing. Jesus was seriously resting in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Okay? And what does that mean? It's very simple. If you recall, you remember the devil tempting Jesus? You remember him saying, okay, if you're hungry, create bread. You can jump off here and you'll be fine. And Jesus told him, be gone, devil. Okay? That's just like summing it up. Okay, so he was really tested before in the wilderness. And he passed with flying colors. But the trial that Jesus was fixing to face was going to push him to his limits. And that's what we're going to see in these upcoming verses. We get stressed out about a single test, or a couple hard math problems, or a hard paper that we have to write, or because our parent says that you have to be home at 9 o'clock. That stresses us out. So how hard do you think it was for Jesus to face the cross? Had to be so hard. But Jesus was prepared. He'd done all the right things throughout his life, including praying continually in order to stay connected with the Father and to remain empowered by the Spirit. Which, listen, that is something we should be doing. Is praying to have a continuous relationship with the Father and the Son. Okay, and the Holy Spirit, having that relationship. And being able to go out and bring the gospel to other people because we get out of our comfort zone and we actually do it. And moments before he faced the ultimate test, guess what he did? He went and prayed. He prayed to the Father. And he went to his favorite spot to pray. And that's where verses 41 through 46 come in. And he withdrew from them, meaning from the disciples, about a stone's throw, and that, stone's throw away, so that just depends on how far you can throw a stone, honestly, and knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. Now listen, this is how cool this was. The disciples were supposed to be praying, but what did we learn? They were asleep. And Jesus, in that moment, stepped away a little bit to spend time with the Father himself. Jesus was close to his disciples, but his connection with the Father was unique. And we see this from John 17, verse 21. That they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you. That they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. There is a special connection between Jesus and the Father. But keep this in mind. Jesus came to earth to deal with sin. And he knew that from eternity past with God, that God had ordained his death as the means of redemption. Jesus knew he would die, and he predicted his death multiple times. However, on this night, the full reality of his imminent suffering came to bear upon his humanity. And honestly, this was not something he wanted to experience. He said, please, let this cup pass by me. Verse 42. To quote it correctly, fully right. If you are willing, remove this cup from me. Very similar. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He didn't want to face it if he didn't have to, but he was willing to follow the Father no matter what. And that is amazing right there. So we see that Jesus was only a stone throw away from the disciples in a physical sense, but spiritually, he was miles away from the disciples. The disciples were asleep when he told them to pray. because the disciples were overwhelmed by physical and fleshly weaknesses. And even though Jesus was physically tired, because let's be honest, he had to be tired, but he was as spiritually focused as ever. 1 Peter 18 through 21 says, 1 Peter 1, 18 through 21 says, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in the last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. That shows us right there, Jesus came to earth to deal with sin. And I kind of said this earlier, but he came to earth to deal with sin. And it said, literally, he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in last times for the sake of you. We see there, that is what I was talking about earlier when I said that he knew from eternity past with God who ordained his death, because he's always been there. Jesus knew, like I said, he would die and predicted his death multiple times. And honestly, this was not something he wanted. I covered all that too. I'm so sorry about that. Just the night before, though, Jesus had shared Passover with the disciples. He shared the cup, which represented his sacrifice. The cup served as a reminder of God's promise to send the Messiah. But the problem is, for generations, God's people have waited for this fulfillment and the promise of that promise. But they didn't understand that the rescue did not require physical prowess or the military. The sacrifice required a payment for sin, and the cup was a symbol of what he would experience, okay? Even though he wanted to be freed from the burden, Jesus was still fully surrendered to God's will. And that is the last little part of it. Verse 46. And he said, verse 42 again. The second part of 42. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Okay? We see he's saying, I am going to do what you told me to do. What I willingly came to do. I'm going to follow through and do the things. I'm going to die for these people because he loves us, honestly. And that's why he chose to do that. He willingly submitted to all this. He didn't fight it. He asked, is there any way it could be passed from me? But ultimately he said, yes, I'm going to do it. And in response to Jesus' prayer to the Father, an angel visited him. And we see that in verse 43. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven. And here's the cool part. Strengthening him. The angel supplied him with supernatural strength for the trials ahead. This is what I'm talking about. Jesus was still a man. He gave up some of the divine abilities, okay? So he set aside them, okay? So that he could experience life as a man. He had to be fully man. So he gave him a supernatural strength to carry through with what he knew the Father wanted him to do. And let's be real. I just told you earlier, if someone says, walk to your death, I'm going to turn around and run away. So yeah, it would take supernatural strength to actually go to a death knowing, think about this. If it's an instant death, it's not as bad, but he got hung on a cross. Okay? He needed help from above to live in complete obedience. He wasn't going to do it on his own. This set the precedence of what we should be doing in our lives, leaning upon the Father, asking for strength to get through the day of what we're going through. Even if you feel it's something small, it's not. If it's something that bothers you, It's something important to God. Talk to Him. Let Him know. Be obedient and talk to the Father. Build that relationship. So, even though the cup wouldn't be removed from Jesus, God did provide that supernatural strength so that Jesus could faithfully endure these trials. What we see, though, is at the end of that is the disciples were sleeping. And I want to point this out again because they weren't being obedient. Okay? Because they thought getting rest is more important than praying for strength to overcome temptation and sin. That is what they thought. Let's just be honest there. Because if they thought praying to the Father was the most important thing in that moment, let's be honest, they would not have fallen asleep. They would have stayed awake. So Jesus reminded them. Think about this. If you don't spend time with God, don't you feel an emptiness? Don't you feel like you're missing something? Because you're not building that relationship with Him. You're leaving Him in the dirt. And you should want to spend that time with Him. And then in closing, there's so much truth in all of this. 39 through 46. How often do we do what we feel will benefit us the most? When do we actually listen to God for direction? When do we be still and spend time in prayer? Lord, help direct me where I should go. Lord, help guide me. Help me figure this out. It took me a long time to stop and do that. It's part of how I came to be at ABC. Because for the first time in my life, I actually stopped and asked God, what is it that you want? I can't do me anymore. Yes, and I still struggle with it. I almost struggle every day with it. Doubting myself. It's part of that's part of my flesh. But I'm going to ask for strength daily to overcome that. Here's the thing, though. It's okay to ask God if He can change what we feel He is telling us to do. If you feel like God's saying, hey, go be a missionary. It's okay to be like, Lord, is there any way there's something else You've designed me to do? If not, I will still do Your will. And listen to what God has to say to you. It is okay to question, to be confident in what He's telling you to do. There's nothing wrong with that. Ultimately, though, like I said, we need to listen and ask for strength and wisdom so that we can carry out the plans that God has for us. This way we can faithfully follow Him. And if we falter, though, He will pick us up and help us through everything. Ask yourself that question. Am I spending time in prayer with the Father? Am I asking Him for strength to overcome the temptations that are in my life? And am I asking Him for guidance in what I should do? If it's about taking classes in high school, then that is cool. That is something to be thinking about, worried about. If it's about where to go to college, that is super important. Because college changes things. You have so many freedoms. It's important that we know where we're going and what we're going to do when we go there so that we can still remain obedient to God and not fall into temptations. If it's about a job, pray. Like I mentioned multiple times, it's how Heather and I came to ABC. Was through prayer and asking God, should we still be doing this? Or should we go into this? We've been rejected twice. Is this a good idea? And letting Him say and listen to Him. Push us in the direction that He wanted us to go. Ask yourself, are you spending that time in prayer with God, listening to Him? Bow your heads with me, and I'll close us out in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I am so thankful that You gave me this opportunity to bring what You laid upon my heart about praying and how Christ represented all the things that we are supposed to be and the things we're supposed to be doing. I pray that each person listening, myself, adults, kids, anybody, that they heed your words and that I heed your words. Because I feel you working on me about praying. And it's why I've done things to try to continue to build that relationship with you more and more. And I pray that other people hear this and they know they're not alone with trying to build this relationship and trying to figure out ways. Because we do live in a busy world, but it's time we set aside some time in order to spend it with you. And I just pray that you give each person clarity on this. And that you help guide them through temptation, away from temptation, and through the path of life. In your glorious name, amen. All right, one more lesson, and I will get that to you next week.